Hello and welcome to Unit 3, Part 1. My name is Mr. Bell and we're going to talk about using function notation to evaluate domain and range, interpret the meaning of parts of a function in context. This slide says to use function notation to analyze and evaluate functions. And it's got f of open parentheses equals y. And this is just a different way of writing y equals 2x squared minus 3. In place of the y, in algebra we use something called function notation a lot of times. That's what this symbolically represents. And I'll read these top two functions up here. It says f of x is equal to 2x squared minus 3, and g of x is equal to negative 6x plus 4. Basically what this is saying is that f of x is a function, here it is, g of x is its own function, and here it is. And whatever we plug in place of this x beside the f, we're going to have to plug that in everywhere inside the actual function or equation in order to evaluate. So let's take a look at the first one. It says f of 3. So what that means is I'm going to take f of 3, and I'm going to take that 3 value that has replaced the x, and I'm going to plug it everywhere there is an x in my function. So in place of the x, I'm going to put the 3. And then I'm actually going to evaluate and see what answer I get. I got a value of 15. So what this means is when I evaluate this particular function, for the value of 3 in place of the x, my result is 15. So this basically says when x is 3, the y value is equal to 15. It's just a different way to represent an equation. Let's look at number 2. It says g of negative 2. Well, in this case, the g tells me to use the function on the right instead of the one we used in the first problem. And everywhere there is an x, I'm going to replace that x with negative 2 because that's what I'm evaluating this particular function for. G of negative 2 is equal to 16 in this case when I worked it out. So basically, the x value is negative 2. I plug it into the correct function in place of x. Gave me a result of 16. Last one says to take f of 3 and then add it to g of negative 2. So I'm going to start with the f of function, which is my function on the left, and everywhere there is an x value, I'm going to plug in a 3. And then for the g of function, the g of negative 2, I'm going to use the right function, and everywhere there is an x, I'm going to plug in a negative 2. And then I'm going to evaluate this and see what I get. I got a result of 31. On this slide, we'll determine the meaning of the functions listed below. If you notice on number 4 here, it says x equals hours, and f of x represents the total pay. And what you may remember is inside the parentheses beside the letter, f of x is equal to 50. Well, the x is, in this case, it represents a 5, which represents the number of hours. F of x, the total f of 5, represents this right side, which is the total pay. So the way you would write your answer is this. The way this particular function reads, it reads, in 5 hours, the total pay was 50 bucks. Okay, take a look at the second one. It says x equals hours studied, and g of x equals the grade on the test. So if I'm asked to interpret what g of 0 equals 30 actually means, this translates into 0 hours studied, as you can imagine, resulted in a 30 on the test. All right. That's it for today. Thank you for watching and hope this helps.